Keep it safe! Target's up high! Hey! Lost one, keep it!
One torpedo. Just one. Out of everything the Royal Navy threw at the most powerful battleship ever built by Germany, it was a single torpedo, dropped from a rickety, slow-moving, fabric-covered biplane that looked like it belonged in the previous war, that sealed the fate of the Bismarck. Not the shells from battleships. Not the bombs from dozens of aircraft. One torpedo from a plane that flew slower than a modern sports car. And because of it, over 2,000 men never came home. Let that sink in for a moment. The year is 1941. The world is on fire. Nazi Germany has swept across Europe with a terrifying efficiency that left the entire world holding its breath. The British Isles stand almost alone against the Third Reich, their survival depending on a fragile chain of supply ships crossing the North Atlantic. Food, fuel, weapons, medicine. Everything Britain needed to survive came across that ocean. And Hitler knew it. And he had a plan to cut that lifeline. His plan had a name. Bismarck. She was, by any measure, a monster. Not just in size, though her size was extraordinary. Over 820 feet long. A beam of over 118 feet. Fully loaded. She displaced more than 50,000 tons of steel, machinery, armor, and firepower. Her main armament was 8 15-inch guns arranged in 4 twin turrets, capable of hurling shells that weighed nearly 1,800 pounds each to a range of over 20 miles. Her armor was extraordinary, up to 14 inches thick in places. She had the latest fire control systems, the most advanced targeting technology Germany could produce, and a top speed of over 30 knots. She was fast enough to run from almost anything she could not fight, and powerful enough to destroy almost anything she could not outrun. The Germans were proud of her. Deeply, almost personally proud. Admiral Erich Raeder, the commander of the German Navy, had spent years fighting for ships like this. The Kriegsmarine, Germany's navy, had always struggled for resources and attention compared to the army and the Luftwaffe. But the Bismarck represented something. She represented the possibility that Germany could challenge British naval dominance, the cornerstone of British power for centuries. Hitler himself came to see her. He toured the ship, spoke to her crew, and felt the weight of what she represented. To the German public, she was a symbol of national strength and technological superiority. To the British, she was a nightmare. Now, to understand why one single torpedo mattered so much, you need to understand the strategic situation in the spring of 1941. Britain was in desperate trouble. The Battle of Britain had been fought and won in the skies the previous summer, but the threat from the sea was constant and brutal. German U-boats were sinking British supply ships at a terrifying rate. The Atlantic was a killing ground, and the British Admiralty knew that if a surface raider as powerful as the Bismarck got loose in the Atlantic among the convoys, the results could be catastrophic. So when word came through in May of 1941 that the Bismarck had left the Baltic and was heading for the Atlantic, every alarm in the British Naval Command went off at once. The Germans had given her operation a grand name. Operation Rheinübung, Exercise Rhine. The plan was elegant in its ambition. Bismarck, along with her companion, the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen, would break out into the North Atlantic, rendezvous with the 2 Scharnhorst-class battleships already based in Brest, France, and together they would tear apart the convoy routes. The potential damage to Allied shipping was almost impossible to overstate. But the British were watching. On May 20th, 1941, Swedish forces spotted a large German naval force heading through Swedish coastal waters. The information was passed to the British. A Swedish naval officer, it would later emerge, had quietly relayed the sighting to the British legation in Stockholm. From that moment, the hunt was on. RAF Spitfires were sent to photograph the ships at anchor in the Norwegian fjords. A pilot named Michael Suckling flew a high-altitude reconnaissance mission on May 21st and brought back photographs that confirmed the worst. There she was, the Bismarck, unmistakable and enormous, anchored in a Norwegian fjord with the Prinz Eugen beside her. The British Admiral John Tovey, commanding the home fleet from his flagship King George V, immediately began positioning his forces. cruisers were sent to patrol the Denmark Strait, the narrow passage of water between Iceland and Greenland, one of the two routes Bismarck could use to break out into the Atlantic. Other ships watched the northern passage between Iceland and the Faroe Islands. The trap was being set. On May 23, 1941, in the grey, cold waters of the Denmark Strait, the British heavy cruisers HMS Suffolk and HMS Norfolk were on patrol. The weather was terrible, visibility was poor, and sheets of rain swept across the surface of the water. And then, out of the murk, the Suffolk's radar operator picked up a massive contact. There she was, the Bismarck. Suffolk immediately sent the contact report and began shadowing the German ships, using her radar to track them in the poor visibility. It was tense, dangerous work. Bismarck's guns could outrange Suffolk's. But the British cruisers kept the contact, sending a continuous stream of position reports back to Admiral Tovey and the home fleet. And now the British made their move. Sailing south to intercept was a powerful British force built around two capital ships. HMS Prince of Wales, a brand new battleship so new that she still had civilian contractors working on her gun turrets, and HMS Hood. HMS Hood. The name deserves to be spoken with respect and with a kind of quiet grief. For 15 years, HMS Hood had been the largest warship in the world. She was called the Mighty Hood. She was the ship that Britain showed off to the world, that sailed on goodwill cruises, that appeared in films, that embodied British naval power and prestige. Her crew was intensely proud of her. To serve on Hood was an honor. She was beloved, but she was old. Built in 1920, designed in the era before aerial warfare had changed the nature of naval combat. Her horizontal armor, the plating on top of her decks, was not as thick as it should have been by 1941 standards. She had been scheduled for a refit to address this, but the war had intervened. When she sailed to meet the Bismarck, she was magnificent and proud and, in one critical way, vulnerable. Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland commanded the British force. He was a capable and experienced officer. He knew the risks. He had concerns about Hood's deck armor. But there was no choice. The Bismarck had to be stopped before she broke free into the open Atlantic. On the morning of May 24, 1941, in the cold, gray waters of the Denmark Strait, the two forces met. What happened next is one of the most devastating moments in British naval history. The battle opened at extreme range. Both sides opened fire almost simultaneously. Holland had positioned his ships so that the German guns could not easily bring all their weapons to bear, an attempt to minimize the time his ships were exposed to the enemy's broadsides. But from the German side, the gunnery was extraordinary. Bismarck's guns found their range with shocking speed. The shells were enormous, the kind of shells that could punch through inches of steel armor as though it were cardboard. Hood was hit, then again. And then, on the fifth salvo, a shell from the Bismarck plunged down through Hood's comparatively thin deck armor and into the area of her rear ammunition magazines. What happened was instantaneous. A column of fire shot up. A massive explosion ripped through the ship. The Hood broke in two with terrifying speed and sank in less than 3 minutes. 1,418 men were aboard HMS Hood that morning. 3 survived. 3. The shock across the British fleet and the British public when the news reached them was profound. HMS Hood was gone. Sunk in minutes. The pride of the Royal Navy had been destroyed. It was a blow that resonated far beyond the military. It was felt in living rooms and pubs and homes across Britain. The mighty Hood was at the bottom of the sea, and the Bismarck was still out there. Prince of Wales, despite still having civilian workers aboard, continued fighting. She scored several hits on the Bismarck. One of those hits was significant. A shell struck Bismarck forward, penetrating the hull and causing flooding. 2 forward fuel tanks were ruptured, and oil began leaking into the sea behind the German ship. Bismarck's top speed was reduced, and Admiral Gunther Lütjens, commanding the German force, was worried about fuel. The plan to rampage through the Atlantic convoys was suddenly complicated. Lütjens made a critical decision. He detached the Prinz Eugen to operate independently and turned the Bismarck toward occupied France, toward the port of Brest, where she could be repaired. He sent a message to German Naval Command reporting the situation. He was still confident. The Bismarck was damaged but far from crippled. She was still enormously powerful, and if she could reach Brest, she could be repaired and go back out. For a while, it looked like she might make it. The British were in desperate pursuit. Admiral Tovey was pushing his fleet hard, but there was a problem. The Bismarck was fast, and the distance was vast. Every hour, every mile counted. And then, early on May 25th, something extraordinary happened. The British lost her. In a series of confused signals and navigation errors, the British search moved in the wrong direction. The Suffolk lost radar contact. The cruisers and battleships that had been chasing the Bismarck turned north-northeast, toward Norway, while the Bismarck continued southeast, toward France. For 31 agonizing hours, the most wanted ship in the world simply vanished. Aboard the Bismarck, the mood was complex. The crew knew they had sunk the hood. They were proud of that, but they also knew they were damaged, leaking fuel, and heading for port rather than into the glory of the Atlantic. Some of them sensed that something had gone wrong. The pursuit had been too close, too dangerous. And Admiral Lutyens, never a man who radiated confidence to his crew, was not reassuring them. Then Lutyens made another critical mistake. Apparently believing he was still being tracked, or perhaps wanting to communicate his situation to command, he broke radio silence. He sent a long message to German naval headquarters. It was a fatal error. The British Signals Intelligence Network, that remarkable web of intercept stations and codebreakers that was already becoming one of the war's decisive factors, picked up the transmission. They could not immediately decode it, but they could triangulate it. They could get a rough bearing on where it was coming from. It was enough. The mathematics of the situation, combined with the knowledge that Bismarck was damaged and heading for a French port, told the British where she had to be going. The answer was France. Not Norway. France. Admiral Tovey reversed course. The hunt was back on. But time was running out. Every hour, the Bismarck was getting closer to the protective umbrella of the Luftwaffe, to the range of land-based German aircraft that could shield her from attack. And beyond that point, the British surface ships simply could not follow her safely. There was one card left to play, and it was a strange, almost paradoxical card. HMS Ark Royal. Ark Royal was a British aircraft carrier operating with Force H, the British naval force based at Gibraltar. She had been sent north at maximum speed when the chase began, and she carried something that the Bismarck could not easily defend against. She carried the Swordfish. Now, the Fairey Swordfish is an aircraft that takes some getting used to as a weapon of war. Looking at it, you might be tempted to think it was misplaced. It was a biplane. In 1941, when most military aircraft were sleek, fast monoplanes screaming through the sky at 500 miles an hour, the Swordfish cruised at around 90 miles an hour. It was constructed largely of fabric and wire and metal tubing. It had 2 or 3 open cockpits, meaning its crews flew exposed to the full fury of North Atlantic weather. In a real North Atlantic storm, flying a Swordfish was an act of almost inconceivable bravery. The cold alone could be incapacitating. Ice would form on the wings, the wind could tear at you, and you were flying slow enough that every anti-aircraft gun on the Bismarck could track you. The nickname said it all. The aircrew called it the string bag. Not as an insult, actually. It was affectionate. Like the old-fashioned string shopping bags that housewives used, a Swordfish could carry almost anything. Bombs, torpedoes, depth charges, mines, even radar equipment in later versions. For such a simple aircraft, it was remarkably versatile. And its crews loved it. They trusted it. It was reliable in a way that more complicated aircraft sometimes were not. It was tough, could take damage and keep flying. And its very slowness, as we shall see, would turn out to be an unexpected advantage. The torpedo it carried was the standard British Mark 12 aerial torpedo, 18 inches in diameter, nearly 18 feet long, carrying a warhead of about 500 pounds of Torpex explosive, a compound roughly 50% more powerful than TNT. When that warhead found its target, the results were devastating. On May 24th, a first Swordfish attack had been launched from HMS Victorious. 9 aircraft, flying in terrible weather, had managed to find the Bismarck and score 1 torpedo hit. The hit had struck Bismarck's armored belt, the thick side plating, and done minimal damage. The Bismarck barely felt it, but it proved the concept. The aircraft could find her. Now, on the evening of May 26th, the last chance had arrived. At around 7 in the evening on May 26th, Ark Royal launched 15 Swordfish. The conditions were appalling. The flight deck was pitching violently in the heavy seas. The wind was gusting to 50 miles an hour. The air temperature was bitterly cold. The sky was a chaos of rain and cloud and fading light. First, a disaster almost occurred. The 15 Swordfish, finding a ship in the murk, attacked it. It was HMS Sheffield, a British cruiser that had been sent ahead to shadow the Bismarck. The Swordfish had not been told she was there, and in the poor visibility, radar blips look much the same. Several torpedoes were fired at the Sheffield. Fortunately, the torpedoes were fitted with magnetic detonators that proved effective, exploding on contact with the sea before they could reach the Sheffield. The remaining ones were evaded by the cruiser's captain with skillful maneuvering. No harm was done, aside from the embarrassment and the near catastrophe. One pilot, returning to Ark Royal after this farcical incident, is reported to have signaled to the Sheffield the apologetic message, "Sorry for the kipper." In the gallows humor of war, it was both funny and entirely appropriate. The Swordfish landed back on the carrier, were rearmed, this time with contact detonators instead of the defective magnetic ones, and were launched again. The second attack went in at around 9 in the evening, in conditions that had, if anything, gotten worse. Driving rain, low cloud, winds gusting dramatically. The Bismarck was alerted now, her anti-aircraft gunners at their weapons, her radar scanning the sky. And this is where the Swordfish's slowness, that apparent weakness, became something unexpected. Bismarck's anti-aircraft fire control systems were designed for fast aircraft. Her quick-firing guns, her flak batteries were calibrated and trained to lead fast-moving targets, to fire ahead of where a diving bomber or a high-speed torpedo plane would be when the shell arrived. The Swordfish were moving so slowly that the fire control calculations kept getting it wrong. The shells were bursting where a faster aircraft would have been. The Swordfish, incredibly, slipped through barrages that would have destroyed almost any other aircraft. 15 aircraft, coming in from multiple directions to split the anti-aircraft fire, skimming low over the enormous waves. Their crews hunched against the cold and the noise and the sheer terror of it all, pressed home their attack. Hits were scored. 3 torpedoes found their mark. 2 struck the Bismarck in the area forward of the engine rooms, causing damage but not the mortal blow. The third torpedo, the one that would end the story of the most powerful German warship afloat, struck the Bismarck in her stern, in the narrow, vulnerable area where her twin rudders connected to the steering mechanism of the ship. The rudder jammed, 12 degrees to port. Think about what that means for a ship trying to steer. A rudder jammed hard over does not just prevent you from turning. It forces you to turn constantly in one direction. The Bismarck began to steam in a great, helpless circle. Her crew immediately tried everything. They attempted to jury-rig the steering. They sent divers into the flooded steering compartment. They tried to steer with the propellers alone, varying the speed of the 3 propeller shafts to induce some direction. In the Force 8 gale, in the towering seas of the North Atlantic, nothing worked. The greatest battleship in the German Navy was going around and around in circles, heading in the direction she least wanted to go, heading toward the British fleet. At 11:40 that night, Admiral Lutyens sent a signal to German Naval High Command. It was simple, devastating, and final. He said, "Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." That was it. The Bismarck was finished and her admiral knew it. Aboard the ship, the mood that night was almost beyond description. 2,300 men, trained sailors, many of them young, many of them barely more than boys, knew what was coming. Some wrote letters home. Some prayed. Some gathered together with friends, talking quietly. The engines were still running. The ship was still moving. But she was circling, helpless, through the darkness and the storm, waiting for dawn and the guns of the British fleet. Some messages came through from German Naval Command. They were meant to encourage the crew to boost morale. They had exactly the opposite effect. One message read, All Germany is with you. Another promised that U-boats were being sent to rescue survivors. The crew read between the lines. Nobody was coming in time. They were on their own. Through the night, British destroyers harassed the Bismarck, making torpedo attacks in the darkness. The Bismarck fought back, firing her guns at attackers she could barely see. She scored no significant hits. The Polish destroyer Run, one of the ships that had escaped the German conquest of Poland to serve with the Royal Navy, approached to close range and engaged the Bismarck with her much smaller guns. It was an extraordinary act of defiance from a ship that had already lost everything. Piron's captain actually signaled the Bismarck by light, "I am a Pole," and then he charged. His destroyers could not possibly hurt the Bismarck in any serious way. But he was there, and his nation's flag was there. And sometimes that matters in ways that are hard to explain rationally. Dawn came on May 27, 1941. And with the dawn came King George V and Rodney. HMS Rodney was an old battleship by 1941 standards, but she carried 9 16-inch guns, the largest guns in the Royal Navy. King George V, Tovey's flagship, carried 10 14-inch guns. Together, they represented a weight of broadside that even the Bismarck could not simply shrug off. At 8:43 in the morning, lookouts on King George V spotted the Bismarck on the horizon, about 14 miles away. She was wallowing in the heavy seas, moving erratically, but still there, still floating, still alive. At 8:47, HMS Rodney opened fire. The final battle of the Bismarck is a terrible thing to describe. It was not a battle between equals. From almost the first minutes, the Bismarck's fate was sealed. She could not steer. Without the ability to steer, she could not maneuver away from incoming shells, and she could not maintain a stable platform for her own guns. The towering North Atlantic swells rolling under her made accurate gunnery almost impossible. Her first salvos came close to the Rodney. Her second salvo actually straddled the British ship, water columns rising on both sides. It was the last time she would come close to hitting anything. Then the British shells began to hit her. A 16-inch shell from Rodney struck forward, in the area of Bismarck's command structure. Admiral Lutyens may have been killed in those first minutes. The exact moment of his death is not known. What is known is that the command of the Bismarck gradually ceased to function as hits accumulated and the ship's bridge and communications were destroyed. The heavy cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire, which had been part of the chase, were there too, adding their fire. At ranges that grew shorter and shorter as the helpless Bismarck could not steer away, the shells poured into her.